Hello, everybody. My name is Osiris Inoue Gonzalez Romero. I'm a PhD candidate at Leiden University, Department of Heritage of Indigenous Peoples. I am very glad to participate in this conference, Sacred Plants of the Americas 2, and I'm very grateful with Via Labachi for the invitation and also with the support of the Chacruna team, mainly Karen, Ibra, and Alex. I will share with you a talk called History of Medicine and Ritual Uses of Psychedelic Plants in Aztec Worldview. The aim of this talk is to show briefly the primary sources which allow us towards the study of the different uses of psychedelic plants in Aztec worldview. The main sources available to us for their study are as follows: archaeological evidence, ancient codices, manuscripts, and chronicles written by the Spanish friars and physicians. And also, in order to carry out research on psychedelics in ancient Mesoamerica, it's necessary to take into account a wide array of methodologies that come from iconography, historiography, philology, and of course take into account the archaeological evidence. By this reason, it's necessary to develop a transdisciplinary approach. This talk is located in the field of the history of medicine because its objectives are to critically reflect on very specific categories such as physician, Tepactiani, medicine, Tepactli, disease, Cocolistli, as well as the different uses associated with these plants, ritual uses, therapeutic uses, ludic, recreational, or hedonistic uses. According with my research carried out by several years, it's possible to recognize different types of different uses of psychedelics. For example, the sacred or ritual uses of psychedelics, therapeutic uses, recreational or hedonistic uses. Also, one of my hypotheses of research is that it's possible to recognize philosophical uses. This is one of the main objectives, for example, of the conference carried out the last week, Philosophy of Psychedelics, sponsored by the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. And of course, it's at the core of my current research, the reflection about the philosophical uses of psychedelics, not necessarily in Mesoamerica, but also in a broader sense. In order to start with this talk, for example, I want to highlight that the Aztec worldview was not isolated from the Mesoamerican tradition, and also the different uses of psychedelics are related with with another different Mesoamerican peoples. In this case, for example, we can find an historical antecedent in the Teotihuacan mural paintings, the Tepantitla mural paintings, painting during the classic period. And here it's possible to appreciate sacred plants at the center of the image. Some of the researchers that have been focused on these images suppose that it could be a plant of Ololiuki, a morning glory, a psychoactive plant, and this is a representation of the Tlalocan. Tlalocan was known as a kind of paradise, a place of joy, a place of fertility, a place of water, a place of pleasure. And of course, this place was related with the deities of the gods of fertility. For example, the gods of food and so on. And it's possible to appreciate a sacred image at the center, for example, a sacred entity with a with a face of a bird, and on both sides it's possible to appreciate two priests with a green feathers at their heads, and also related with some symbols related with water and fertility. Of course, we have to be careful related with the archaeological records and archaeological evidence because, for example, there are mainly hypotheses. In order to move forward, it is necessary to take into account different types of sources, historical sources, and ethnographic research. The next image is related with the sacred mushroom, these mushroom stones that come from the Maya people in Caminalju Guatemala. And of course, it's possible to appreciate that these sacred mushrooms are related with sacred entities, persons, and animals. And of course, it's a very good example to understand in a broader sense the category of entheogens, the deity inside these plants. And of course, for example, according with the Native American ontologies, the Mesoamerican ontologies, there are some sacred entities which live inside these plants, and also this sacred mushroom was considered as the deities. For example, this is one case, but it's not the only one. Here we have another archaeological evidence. For example, we have a visionary experience represented in the lintel of Yaxchilan, Chiapas, that currently is hosted in the British Museum. And on the other hand, we can appreciate a very well-known image known as the smoker, who currently is in Palenque, Chiapas. It's a priest who is smoking probably tobacco or a mixture of different herbs. Also, here we have another example. Here in the Codex Vindobonensis from Mixtec procedents from Oaxaca, it's possible to interpret or it's possible to appreciate a mushroom ritual carried out by some priest, and according with the iconography and according with the image, it's possible to appreciate that some of these characters hold some sacred mushrooms in their hands. It's possible to recognize the dates, for example, the names of these people. Some researchers consider that they were gods, but mainly it's more probably that they were priests, and they were carry out a sacred ritual, a ritual with a sacred mushroom. If someone of you is interested in to know more about this codex, it's possible to reach. It's possible to download in the digital repository of the Leiden University, a specialized study carried out by Martin Jansen and Gavin Aurora Perez Jimenez, which made a study of the whole codex, and you can find, for example, the interpretation of this representation. Also related with the peyote ceramics, here we can appreciate a hollow figurine representing a sated male character with a hump cranial deformation, facial and body painting, holding a peyote in his hand, headdress with crossed bands, and dressed with earmuffs. It's come from this ceramics is from Jalisco, Mexico, from the classic periods in 200 to 900 after Christ. On the other hand, it's possible to appreciate a phytomorph pot with peyote sprouts that comes from Colima, Mexico, from the pre-classic period, 200 before Christ. It's an hypothesis, it's a date, and it's possible to appreciate. Of course, Colima and Jalisco are situated in the west Mexico, in the west coast of Mexico, and are related with different indigenous peoples. Related with the uses of psychedelics in the Aztec worldview, which is the main topic of this talk, it's possible to say the next. The use of ololiuca and peyote for divination was not the only application of these plants among the Aztecs. Like all other hallucinogens, and of course it's this word, it's controversial. Of course, it's a quote of a specialized study, but of course we can reflect critically about this. They were considered as highly effective medicine against several diseases. For example, medicinal properties of ololuki, the pulverized seed, were a remedy for broken or dislocated bones. Ointed with chili and milk on the forehead, it was considered as a remedy against eye diseases. It cured the pains of syphilis, the pains due to the cold, and dissolved swellings. Taken orally, it acted as an aphrodisiac. Others mention in addition that it was used against pain, swellings, fever, and especially against gout. This quote is found in the Relaciones Geográficas de México. Also, according to these researchers, the ability of peyote to induce a state of mind in which the person sees future events is mentioned by Hernandez. He writes that he was told that there were a male and female form of the plant, and the plant had marvelous property for the Indians. Besides an hallucinogenic effect, the peyote was used as a medicine applied externally against pain in the joints. For Richard Evans Schultz and Albert Hoffman, the glyphs carved in the body of Xochipilli represent several plants such as the tobacco flower, the flower of the marigold or ololiuki, the button of siniquiche, fungi or tenanacatl, the flower of poyomatli or cacahuasochitl, a stylized representation of Psilocybe astecorum fungi. It's visible on the pedestal. Based on this identification, Robert Gordon Wasson carried out his interpretation of this sculpture. This flower was carved on the body of Xochipilli, hold the key to the meaning of the statue and, in addition, the metaphorical meaning of flowers in Nahua and Mesoamerican culture. Of course, also it's possible to reflect critically about this sentence of Wasson. I consider that probably is a hasty generalization, but of course, it's very useful to reflect about the meaning of flowers in a broader sense. Here also, it's possible to appreciate another representation of Xochipilli in a teponaztle of stone. It's a representation of a musical instrument. And of course, it's possible to appreciate the plant of the Ololiuki in the face of the deity. Here, for example, it's possible to appreciate some leaves that are related with this sacred plant. This plant was related with Ololiuki, not only because symbolical meaning, but also related with therapeutic uses of this plant. For example, Xochipilli was a deity of the fertility, and also the therapeutic uses of Ololiuki are related with the cure of syphilis and another diseases related with sexual behavior. But related with the music, to explain more precisely the relationship between plants and music, it seems pertinent to me to take as a reference the research carried out by Abraham Casares, who considers that although the interpretation of Gordon Wasson is useful, the truth is that for a more specialized study, it is incomplete because it does not explain the relationship between the plants and flowers found in the sculpture and the music. For instance, Casares has emphasized the role that Ololiuki, whose active principles ergine and hydroxyethylamide, which are of the class of indole alkaloids, contain psychodyspeptic properties. That is, they modify auditory perception. If you are interested in to know more about the relationship between psychedelics and music, it's very useful. The PhD dissertation of Abraham Casares in Xochitl, hallucinogens and music in Mesoamerican and Amerindian thought, defend in Indiana University. Also, for example, I want to share with you some of the rituals related with sacred mushrooms that we can find in the historical sources, especially in the Codex Florentino. And I consider that it will be very enlightened to talk about and to share with you one of the few rituals that we can find in the historical sources. In the Florentine Codex, in Book 9, Chapter 8, in the translation of Dibble Anderson, it's possible to read one of the few sacred mushroom rituals that were recorded. At the very first, mushrooms had been served. They ate them at the time when they said they shall trumpets were blown. They ate no more food. They only drank chocolate during the night, and they ate mushrooms with honey. When the mushroom took effect on them, then they danced, then they wept. But some, while still in command of their senses, entered and sat there by the house, on their seats. They danced no more, but only sat there knowing. One saw in vision that already he would die, and there continued weeping. One saw in vision that he could die in battle. One saw in vision that he would be eaten by the wild beast. One saw in vision that he would take captives in war. One saw in vision that he would be rich, wealthy. One saw in vision that he would buy slaves. He would be a slave owner. One saw in vision that he would commit adultery. He would be struck by a stone. He would be stoned. One saw in vision that his head would be crushed by stones, they would condemn him. One saw in vision that he would perish in the water. One saw in vision he would live in peace, in tranquility, until he died. One saw in vision that he would fall from a rooftop. He would fall to his death. However many things were befall one, he then saw all in vision, even that he would be drowned. And of course, the description continues. And when the effects of the motion had left them, they consulted among themselves and told one another what they had seen in vision. And they saw in vision what would befall those who had eaten no mushrooms and what they went about doing. Some were perhaps thieves, some perhaps commit adultery. Howsoever many things were, all were told that one would take captives, one would become seasoned warrior, a leader of the youths, one would die in battle, become rich, buy slaves, provide banquets, ceremonially bed slaves, commit adultery, be strangled, perish in the water, drown, whatsoever was the befall one. They then saw all in vision, perhaps he would go to his death in an hour. And when the division of the night arrived, when it was exactly midnight, the one who provided the banquet thereupon paid his debt to the gods. He burned paper spattered with rubber. He did as had been told above, and once again chocolate was drunk. 2 or 3 times during the night chocolate was served, and so they danced all night. Indeed, they sang until the dawn broke. A chapter which tells how he who held the banquet performed the act of offering to pay the debt to the gods. This passage it's very useful to understand the broader uses of a sacred mushroom. Of course, it's only an example, and it's not possible to make a hasty generalization. We have to be careful, as I previously mentioned. But I want to underline, for example, that after this ritual, after this ceremony, the people get together to talk about their visions. I consider that it's really, really, really important. And also want to highlight that these visions were related with specific cultural features. In order to move forward, here we have some examples of the psilocybe mexicana. This, of course, Mexico is one of the countries with a wide array of with a long variety of psilocybin mushrooms. But this is, for example, the species which is referred in these historical sources. Also here, we can appreciate an image of Mayahuel. It's the deity of the pulque, the beverage of the god, an alcoholic beverage, but also related with other psychoactive or psychotropic plants. And also was very common to mix pulque with mushrooms, and it is possible to appreciate in a poem preserved in the manuscripts of Romances de los Señores de la Nueva España, translated into English by John Bierhorst. If you are interested, you can do it. In order to move forward with the different uses of psychedelics in Aztec Worldview, it's necessary to highlight as follows. Professional diviners prefer other hallucinogens such as ololiuki, peyote, and pisitol. Divination by using teonanacatl has been reported far less than the use of these hallucinogens. In some of the other codices, pictures of mushrooms are given. Because the codices are often dealing with gods and religion, it seems likely that the mushrooms are the hallucinogenic teonanacatl, and that they were consumed for religious purposes. In most cases, however, There is no adequate description of the real meaning of the representation remains speculative. We have to be aware of this. Another property of the Teonanacatl could have promoted its use for pleasure by some people. Sagun reports that the Teonanacatl not only gave hallucination but also acted as an aphrodisiac. There are no indication of and by whom this specific property was employed. It seems plausible that the prostitute used the Teonanacatl not just for herself, but also for potential clients. Of course, this is an hypothesis of this researcher. Here we can appreciate another image from the Codex Marlavicano, page 19. It's possible to appreciate a man seated eating mushroom, and behind them the image of Mictlantecutli, the god of the underworld. Of course, this is a colonial representation and is not an isolated character that this colonial representation start to link the use of psychedelics or entheogens with the dead or the evil, as we can appreciate later. Related with the information provided by physicians, it's possible to say that ololuki, which some call coachihuitl or snake plant, it's a climbing herb with thin green cordiform leaves, thin stem, green theriatel, long white flowers. The seed is round and very similar to that of cilantro, hence the name in Nahuatl. The term ololuki means round thing of the plant. The roots are fibrous and thin. The plant causes 4-degree burns, heals syphilis, and mitigates the pain produced by the chills. They seed has some medical uses if it is pulverized or taken as a cooking, or if it is used as a poultice in the head of, or forehead with milk and chili. It is said to cure eye problems. When you drink, it acts as an aphrodisiac. This information is provided by Francisco Hernandez. Also, the Florentine Codex, it's a source to know a little bit more about the physicians, the role of the physicians. Here it's possible to appreciate a fragment which is related with the role of physicians, Pactiani in Nahuatl. The physician is a curer of people, a restorer, a provider of health. The good physician is a diagnostician, experienced, a knower of herbs, of stones, of trees, of roots. He has results of examinations, experience, prudence. He is moderate in his acts. He provides health, restores people, provides them splints, sets bones from them, purges them, gives them ethics, gives them potions. He lances, he makes incisions in them, stitches them, revives them, envelops in the ashes. This is the translation, but also here we have a philological analysis of this expression. For example, Shiwiximati, knower of herbs. But for example, from a philological point of view, it's possible to appreciate the presence of the prefix "x," which means eyes or face. And for example, from a critical point of view, the translation could be the knower of the face of the earth, knower of the face of the stones, knower of the face of the tree, knower of the face of the roots, for example. And of course, it's necessary to take into account this cultural future in order to understand the ontological terms, the different perspective embedded in Aztec worldview. Also, in the Florentine Codex, it's possible to appreciate some information related with psychedelics. Of course, written some decades after the conquest of Mexico in the middle of 16th century, between 1548 to 1586, by Fray Bernardino de Sahagún. And of course, these historical sources is useful, but it's also controversial. We can appreciate in one column the text in Nahuatl, and in the another hand, we can possible to appreciate the images in the other side. The information provided by these sources it could be gathered as follows. Related with Ololuki, it's possible to say its leaves are slender, cord-like, small. Its name is Ololuki. It makes one besotted, it deranges one, troubles one, maddens one, make one possessed. He who eats it, who drinks it, sees many things which greatly terrify him. He is really frightened by the poisonous serpent which he sees for that reason. He who hates people causes one to swallow it in drink and food to madden him. However, it smells sour, it burns the throat a little. For good, it is only spread on the surface. Of course, it's possible to appreciate a colonial approach. And for example, it's possible to appreciate the stigmatization of sacred and ritual uses. And these sources, this testimony highlight the therapeutic uses. It's possible to appreciate that dissociation related. In order to move forward and finish this, it's necessary to highlight some cultural feature related with peyote. The peyote, this peyote is white and grows only there in the north region called Mictlán. On him who eats or drinks it, it takes effect like mushrooms. Also, he sees many things which frighten one or make one laugh. It affects him perhaps one day, perhaps 2 days, but likewise it abates. However, it harms one, troubles one, makes one besotted, takes effort on one. I take peyote, I am troubled. Here it's possible to represent a colonial approach of these psychedelics. And related with Tionanacatl, it is called Tionanacatl. It grows on the plains in the grass. The head is small and round, the stem is long and slender. It is bitter and burns, it burns the throat. It makes one besotted, it deranges one, troubles one. It is a remedy for fever, for good. Only 2 or 3 can be eaten. Its sadness depresses, troubles one. It makes one flee, frightens, makes one hide. He who eats many of them sees many things which make him afraid or make him loud. He flees, hangs himself from a cliff, cries out, takes fright. One eats it in honey. I eat mushrooms, I take mushrooms. Of one who is haughty presumptuous, vain of him it is said, he mushrooms himself. This information is provided by the Florentine Codex, Book 11, W. E. Anderson, 1963, page 130. And to finish, I want to share with you some information found in the Historia Natural de la Nueva España, written by Francisco Hernández. Hernández agrees with Sahagún regarding the effects and use of mushrooms in the banquets of the lords. There are others that, without producing laughter, make pass before the eyes all sorts of visions, such as wars and figures of demons, and others enormous and horrendous preferred by the principal men and acquired at great price, and with great care for their feasts and banquets, and which are brown and with a certain acrimony. Hernández, Historia Natural de la Nueva España, tomo 1, page 396. With this, I will finish this presentation. Of course, I am open for all the questions, remarks, suggestions, and so on, and in order to start an open dialogue with all of you. Thank you very much for your attention. If you are interested in some reference related with the historical sources related with the use of psychedelics in Aztec Worldview, of course, you can go directly to these sources or to these specialized studies. And thank you. Mirka Sokamatil Nochi, thank you very much to all. Muchas gracias a todos. There are my email address if you are interested, if you have questions, comments, suggestions. Thank you very much, and start with the dialogue.